Wednesday evening to you, everyone. How are you? It is good to see you. It is good to be seen by you. I, of course, am your host, Bill Sylvie, a.k.a. The Dungeon Delver, the one and only, or at least the only one who'll admit to it. And I hope you're having a fine evening. Now, if you're new to kind of the things we do around here, if you're not really sure what exactly all this is about, 5 nights a week, I live stream old school tabletop RPG goodness with a heavy leaning on first edition advanced D&D and original D&D. But part of that is not merely sitting here talking about books that were made in the previous millennium. No, it is a lot about having some great guests on to talk about things that are pertinent to that and just having a generally good time. And relevant to that is tonight's guest. Of course, he's been on the show several times before. He's a swell guy, and he has forgotten more about classic Dungeons and Dragons than I'll ever know. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome tonight's guest. He's a good friend of mine, so you better be nice to him. The one and to date only, Paul Stormberg. Paul, how are you? We cannot hear you, Paul.
Very good, Bill. Good to see you.
Ah, there you go.
Oh, did I?
Good to see you too, my friend.
Myself? Aha.
I think you muted yourself for just a second. Yes, we have you. You are 5 by 5, as they say. So, some awesome stuff has been going on in Lake Geneva, and you yourself have had.
I never knew what that meant.
What 5 by 5 meant? Oh, I also think there's probably some lag happening. We'll wait to see if Paul can catch up with us. I don't know if he's having internet problems. We'll wait for his network to settle before I keep bombarding him with questions. There we go. That's a little better. Locals
back.
Yes, you're back. Okay. Are you hearing us okay?
I do hear you. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely some interlag going on, I think, unfortunately, Paul. So hopefully that'll settle down. You folks in the chat, of course, can feel free to, if you have any questions for Paul that you want to post up, I'll ask him. Paul has a toothbrush. Or is it a microphone? I couldn't tell.
Ethernet cable.
Ethernet cable. Aha. Okay. So hopefully that'll settle in. That is a very funny frame that Paul's image froze on. I just got to say that. I don't know if we've lost Paul or not, because I don't know of anybody that can hold that face for that long. All right. Well, we'll. You're still here. Okay. All right. I think it was just taking your network a second to settle down, but I think we've got you now.
Okay. Let's hope. Okay.
So anyway. Cool stuff is going on in Lake Geneva, and you're making it happen. The bench dedication, then the reading corner in the Lake Geneva Library. Yes. I've been telling I've been telling our audience about that. There's a lot of awesome stuff. In fact, the beginning of the last time I saw you at GaryCon, when we bumped into each other out in the parking lot there, you were rushing to the Lake Geneva Parks and Rec department to give them a check for the bench, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So I found out by the dumpster behind the Grand Geneva that we had been granted the bench.
Was this some kind of clandestine meeting? You know, the Lake Geneva town council member in a trench coat and.
I was unloading my gear for GaryCon, and that to take place next to the dumpster.
Right. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Grand Geneva is it is essentially a single line. It is not like a hotel all like multiple floors. It is, oh, good Lord, Paul, it's got to be a quarter of a mile long or more. So being in one
yeah,
place,
I think it's actually shorter. Yeah, I think it's actually shorter for you to go from one end to the other by going across the parking lot, because the buildings are strung out along the shoreline.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So yeah, where Paul's talking about he was unloading his stuff, and the convention fills this entire quarter mile stretch. So, you know, if you've got a game that lasts until 4:00 and you want to go meet somebody at 4:05, plan to stop your game 10 minutes before, because you got a hike in front of you if they're down in the exhibit hall area and you're over in one of the other rooms on the other end. It's a big hotel. So you got the info and you went and gave them the check. Now, did you know at that time, did you know that the library was happening?
Yes. So I was made president of the Gygax Memorial Fund in July of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I started going gangbusters on getting ready to do stuff. And then COVID hit. And then the Lake Geneva government stopped meeting. And it kind of slowed things down just a little bit. So, but I had built up a whole line of initiatives that we wanted to use to engage the city on appreciating Gary's legacy and his contribution to Geneva and the world.
Well, that is awesome. And for anyone who might be curious about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but the Gygax Memorial Fund, that's the same one here that was in the reprints of the AD&D books.
That's correct.
So, now, let's not be afraid to call a spade here, Paul. There were people who thought that because those books, those reprints came out in what, 2014, 2012? I don't remember exactly when, but it was a minute or two ago. It was a minute or two ago. And I think there's so 2014, yeah. There were people, I think, who thought that perhaps somebody had disappeared down the rabbit hole with the actual Gygax Memorial Funds, and the press surrounding the initial design, shall we say, for a Gary Memorial certainly didn't seem to help. But it's happening. It's real, and this is a real concrete thing now. And I'm excited. But if I get to go up to GaryCon this year, I can't wait to see these two things. Might have to dust a little snow off the bench, you know, before I take a seat. But otherwise, yes, this is a very real and concrete thing. So I guess the next question would be, what's phase 3?
Well, so obviously the Gygax Memorial Fund, before I ever came on board, raised quite a bit of money, over $200,000. But you might be surprised to know that those books only raised $2,000.
I'm sorry, only raised how much?
So $25,000.
Oh, well, that's a bit of a disappointment.
Yes, and fans also individually donated outside of that a further $25,000. And we had one donor donate the rest of the money. So, and I think the reason was at the time, Gary's brand was down. Dungeons and Dragons brand was down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think America was still coming out of the 2008 housing bubble crash. And people just didn't have a lot of money at that time. And I think it had a little to do with communication as well. But, you know, when I actually got to see the numbers, I was fairly disappointed. I mean, there are literally millions of us who were given this gift by Gary. And I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a bigger showing for it. But like you said, there's a lot of negativity around the initial memorial. And so we are moving past that, and we're making concrete steps forward. And this memorial is going to be built. And we hope to break ground next year.
Yeah, the last time you were on, you told me about what the table layout's going to be like, and I'm just I'm giddy about the idea, man. You know, I'm talking about, hey, I hope I can come up to Lake Geneva for Gary Con. I hope I can get up there at least one more time when this thing is done. So can you refresh our memory on what the gaming table is going to be like?
Yes. Well, first I'll give you that we have a series of initiatives that we're trying to get Lake Geneva, because the first scale got to wanting to build a memorial to Gary was that the city wanted to create an ordinance to forbid a memorial from ever being built in Lake Geneva. That was her first answer. It was not just, no, not a memorial to Gary, but we're going to make an ordinance to ban every memorial. And she eventually rented land in Donian Park. Unfortunately, Donian Park is a wetland preserve. So you can imagine that putting a statue in a wetland preserve is kind of like building a castle in a swamp, as in the Monty Python skit.
Yes. So the Gygax Memorial would be underwater for about 4 months out of every year.
Yeah, it doesn't flood every year, but it does flood seasonally. And in 2019, September, just a couple months after I came on board the Gygax Memorial Fund, that area where we would have had our memorial would have been under 12 feet of water.
Oof. So if you like Dungeons and Dragons and you're a scuba diver.
So there wasn't much desire for us to put the statue there. But we really knew where we wanted it to be. And that is an area that is historically connected to Gary Gygax. And that is at the west end of the park. Now, everybody in Lake Geneva calls the park Library Park. And it's the long stretch of grass shoreline that is on the north shore of Lake Geneva, west of the library. Far end of it, half-acre parcel of land, which is separates street that connects the path. Now, the lake has a path around the shore all the way around. It's called the shore path. and that's where we put the park bench. I saw in an interview that Rob Kuntz said, you know, Gary and I used to sit on these benches, and these kind of iron park benches that sit along the shore path. And he said, one day, Robbie, I'm going to live there. And he pointed to Stone Manor. And in fact, Gary ends up living in Stone Manor and writing a couple of his best-selling books while living there. Well, anyways, Gary liked to hang out at that end of the park, Elm Park or Library Park. And that's where we would like to put the memorial because it's more historically connected to Gary's story.
Okay.
That's where and daydream and imagine our own, dream of being a fantasy novelist and living in Stone Manor and, you know, making something of himself. And he made that dream come true. So we think that area of the park is the perfect setting for the memorial. Now, the memorial itself is going to be about a 4-foot by 8 polished granite table with polished granite benches along either side. And then Gary seated at one end as a bronze statue seated on a throne and wrapped around the base. And Gary will be holding his hand out and pointed down at the map and there'll be a map, a bronze map on the tabletop about the same size as the table, but it will be a scaled map of the first level of Greyhawk Castle, like the original first level of Greyhawk Castle, like the one that he originally demoed Elisa and Ernie on the first night that he ran a Dungeons and Dragons game, even though it wasn't called Dungeons and Dragons at that time. And so the idea is that people will be able to gather around Gary at this table, play Dungeons and Dragons. There'll be 1-inch squares on the map, and you'll be able to put your miniatures on there. And the rooms will be keyed. And then we'll put the original 1973 key online for people to use so they can recreate that moment, the dawn of role-playing games, the dawn of Dungeons and Dragons specifically. And they'll be able to upload their own versions of it, and they can change the map and upload their versions of the map. They can change the contents of the rooms. So every year, even though they're using the same map, they'll be able to come back year after year after year and play a new game. Also, Gary's hand being pointed down at the map, the DM will be able to sit next to Gary and have Gary roll the dice for the game.
Man, the concept sounds amazing, and it sounds absolutely wonderful, and I can't wait to see it, dude. I'm excited. Every time you tell me about it, I'm like, oh god, that's gonna be so cool. That's gonna be so damn cool.
Let me tell you, one of the sculptors we talked to, his name is James Nance, and he was selected to do the Desert Storm Memorial, the National Mall in Washington, D.C. He's done some amazing things for the Naval War College and some other fantastic stuff. But he said, I get 1,000 projects, 1,000 requests a year, commissions. And he says, I can only pick to do 1 or 2 of them. He said, but I picked yours because it was such a fantastic concept. He said, statues are usually looked at and photographed, but this one will live and will have people and moments with the staff. And so he thought it was an incredibly special way of honoring Gary. And he said, this will be a memorial for the ages. And this is a guy who does this for a living. It's very important memorials around the world.
Man, that sounds super cool. Sorry about that, Elle. I didn't know that I could do that. It's an automated function of YouTube, but I will see how I can turn that off. But I saw This is a comment here because I think this is kind of in a wheelhouse of a discussion you and I were having earlier, and this is Vaughn Gifford asked this. I would think Lake Geneva would bend over backwards for the Gygaxes in TSR. But you got some insight into that. I think you, at the very least, you gained some insight. So what's the wisdom there, Paul?
Well, so it's an interesting town because it's not just people who are Lake Genevans. It's also people who are Chicagoans. A vacation there. And so the Chicagoans own the homes that are on the lake, the $1 million homes. And they want their town to be this bucolic little lake town, a quaint little lake town. Mm-hmm. But the local businesses need it to be a tourist town because they got to be able to put food in their families' mouths. They have to be able to run their businesses, sell merchandise, run their restaurants, sell food. They got to pay taxes so the school stays open, so their kids have a school that they can go to locally. And so they have to live there year round. And it's this struggle between these people who want it to be what it has never been, which is, a quiet little lake town. It's always been a tour quiet little lake. It's just never been any other way. And so it's this constant struggle of control between wanting tourism and not wanting tourism. And, some of the more highbrow elements of the city might not necessarily find Dungeons and Dragons as cool as they might think they want it to be. But it's important to know that at one point, Gary employed 6% of Lake Geneva's population. 6% of the town was working for that one. And so it's coming around. I think that people in Lake Geneva think local guy who made a funny game that a bunch of people play, and there was a craze back in the 80s. But when you start talking about all of Gary's accomplishments in Lake Geneva, writing Dungeons and Dragons. He wrote Dungeons and Dragons right there in town. Mm-hmm. He published it there in town through his company that he founded. Eventually, that company would employ the population in Lake Geneva and make tens of millions of dollars. And not only did that company make D&D, but they made hundreds of other board games and games that are enjoyed by millions of people all over the world. And on top of that, Gary, of course, was an avid science fiction and fantasy reader, and he aspired to be an author, but he really encouraged the publication of science fiction and fantasy through TSR. Did you know that they published over 260 short stories and built over 360 novels? Came out of Lake Geneva. 360. Now think about that. Tens of millions of people have played D&D. The estimates are 50 million, right? But hundreds of people have read the science and fantasy that came out of that little tiny town. At one point, Gary used a tagline for TSR. He called it the fantasy crossroads of the world. And that's what he made it. Because of Dungeons and Dragons and because of the fantasy fiction that he published there. And of course, just the creation of his game, which created other fantasy board games and strategy games and that sort of thing. I mean, he really made the town the fantasy crossroads of the world. And the way it really became the crossroads of the world is when he founded Gen Con, which he also did in Lake Geneva. That in 1968 is going to be the 55th anniversary. Gen Con just hosted 70,000 people in Indiana. And if it is largest event in Indianapolis. It's bigger than the Indianapolis 500. In 4 days, in over
Wow.
74 days. And you know what? He loves gamers because gamers come to spend money. He says a lot of people come to other events and they're like, penny pinching and saving money. But when gamers come there, they are there to buy merchandise. They are there to get food. They are there to have a good time. And they spend money. And so the mayor and all of Indianapolis really understands that Gen Con is, incredibly valuable to them. But that started in Lake Geneva. So Gary's legacy in Geneva is not just Dungeons and Dragons, more. And Ed Schwinn, Schwinn Bicycles, Ed Schwinn, who is the president of the Geneva Lake, he said, there's a lot of famous families in Lake Geneva, but I don't think any of them have done more for Lake Geneva than Gary Gygax. And that's because those people all made their fame and fortune elsewhere. Gary was a dirt poor cobbler living on food stamps, and he created all of this there. And he didn't take off and go to Chicago and move to Chicago. He came hometown, shared that with his community. This is what we're trying to educate the community about. This is not just a little weird game that people are playing. I say, there are thousands of fans that come to Lake Geneva every year. They have their favorite. They know the street names, the addresses. They have their favorite buildings. Heck, they have their favorite PO box. Bill 756.
756 Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
All mean a lot. When they go there for their pilgrimage, there's not enough for them to connect. So this is a long answer. This is the long answer to answer the question about tourism. So I've done modeling, and the modeling shows that all of these initiatives together, we have a walking tour map called the Adventures Map of the memorial itself. The Geneva Lake Museum has an exhibit, which I'm putting together right now, called The Wizard of Lake Geneva. Horticultural Hall is going to have a display and a founder's stone that we're going to put in there. All of this will cause people to have to stay overnight, one night, or maybe 2 nights to get it. And that brings money into the coffers of the city. So if you want to know how much economic impact our will have, $3.6 million of economic impact to the city of Lake Geneva, and $340,000 of direct room from parking and room tax that goes directly into the coffers of the city. And some of that money goes to improving schools and roads and the quality of life for people in Lake Geneva. Gary is not done giving to his community. He's going to continue giving to his community through these initiatives and his legacy. That's the elevator pitch.
That is, I was going to say, hell, I'm ready to move up to Lake Geneva now, just so I can be a part of it. Not hardly, but no, I think that's wonderful. All kidding aside, and I do, I do think that's wonderful. Now, let me throw you a little outside curve. Not trying to dust you off the plate, but just a bit of a question. Have you guys talked to the VFW?
Yes. Specifically, American Legion Post 24 on Henry Street.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is where some of the initial Gen Cons were held, and it's where they held their seasonal mini cons every year. And so we are currently working right now with the city of Lake Geneva to establish a 3-day fantasy festival in October, which will include all of these locations I've talked about. For example, we're going to rent Horticultural Hall for 3 days. And there will
Nice.
be gaming there, and there'll be an introduction to D&D. There's going to be a display about the history of Gen Con. There's going to be an RPEX event that takes places around the courtyard. There's going to be an SCA event, but we're going to have a Renaissance fair in the park. The library is going to have a literary encounter, so to speak, where we'll have authors that a lot of those authors writing those 360 novels that came out of TSR, a lot of them still live in Lake Geneva. And so they're going to be there to share the idea of that literary legacy. The Geneva Lake Museum will be open, and that, the Wizard of Lake Geneva exhibit is specifically about Gary Gygax, his legacy, his contributions to the city of Lake Geneva. And so there'll be gaming there, and you can also see the exhibit there. There'll be gaming at Horticultural Hall. Yolanda Frontani of 330 Center Street is going to possibly have an interaction so people can come see the house where D&D was born. And
Nice.
so the idea is that we're going to draw a whole bunch of people to the Renaissance Fair who don't know anything about Lake Geneva and Dungeons and Dragons. And we're going to expose them to that hobby and hopefully bring more people into it. But knowing that the hobby was essentially started by Dave Arneson and, for the purposes of the town, Gary Gygax.
Right on, right on. You say those words, drawing people to who are in the Renaissance Fair circles but don't know about Dungeons and Dragons. Those concepts seem so utterly alien in my mind. Like, how could you do one and not know the other? That just kind of floors me. But I guess
No. I mean, casual people from Chicago and Madison and Milwaukee who are not gamers will come to Lake Geneva for the Renaissance Fair and the festival, but they'll be exposed to the greater legacy of Gary in town and possibly get interested in fantasy literature or get interested in wargaming or get interested in role-play games. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. All right.
Because one of the Gygax Memorial Fund is education.
That's awesome. So we actually we've got a couple of questions here for you. Going back to what you were saying about 6%, this comes from Dirty History and Hobbies, says, if they were employing roughly 6% of the local population at some point, what was the town's attitude towards TSR following the massive layoffs in June and July of 1983?
Oh, well, it was a big blow to the local economy for sure, because suddenly you had everybody needing a job. There were actually ads in the paper telling TSR employees how they could get help for being recently laid off, because it was big news. I think Jeff Perrin told me one day they laid 100 people off in one day. And so, that's about 1 3/4% of Lake Geneva's population that was suddenly unemployed that day. And so I don't think they saw it negatively. I think they saw the game more as a fad, and it got big, and then it fell really hard. And I think everybody kind of expected it. And it was just, it wasn't like, it wasn't, I don't think it was that this is a fad, this is the loop. It became a big thing, and, it's a little unusual, but it was created by one of our local guys. There's a funny editorial in the Lake Geneva Regional News back in about 1982 or so, and the article was titled "They've Got the Devil Up at TSR," and it was a parody of the Satanic Panic fear. And pretty much the entire article was like, really? You think they have the devil at TSR? Gary Gygax, the guy who had Bible study every Saturday in his house for 5 years. This is the guy, the Jehovah's Witness, that came to my door and on the door and convinced me. that's the guy you think has the devil in his company? Nobody believed it.
Trevor McWilliams,
because he was Gary Gygax.
In town, right? Trevor McWilliams asks, a few years back, you were working on cataloging Gary's original works. Any forward momentum on that project? Thanks for all your work ensuring Gary's legacy, rather.
Well, I wish there was movement on it. There was great potential for movement, but a contract disagreement ended up in a lawsuit. And, like with most things in the Gygax story, there's great potential and there's great things potentially happening, but then lawsuits happen. I think that initially when Gary passed away, as I said, his brand was down because D&D's brand was down. I think Pathfinder was doing better than D&D at certain points. And I think it took a combination of a new edition of the game, plus Stranger Things, plus the pandemic to cement a huge audience of popularity. But, I think there's still a possibility. The intellectual property is safe. I can say that. It's been cataloged. People have, I created a catalog of it. So if anybody is interested in developing it, that will be possible. So we'll see though. There's a lot of legal struggles happening, and I'm not really part of those legal struggles, and I can't really have a say in them. But I have tried to do my best to safeguard the intellectual property. I'm hopeful something can be done when that part of his legacy can be celebrated and published and enjoyed, but I don't have control over that.
Right on. I understand. Let's see. Vaughn again asks, do you feel TSR was mismanaged after Gary?
I think that it was, but I think it was mismanaged by everybody who worked at the company. I mean, I think that when I used to ask everybody that I would talk to from TSR, who are you most grateful was running the company, or who do you really think had the company's at heart? It was Gary. I thought it was Gary, and some people said Don Kay because he had a level head and a good business head. He wasn't taken to listen to Gansey all the time, and he kept grounded. Where Gary was off on wild speculation, Don kept him grounded. Rob Kuntz said that the company would have turned out very differently if Don Kay continued to live onward. But I've even seen where some people have said that it was Brian Bloom, because Brian Bloom was a bean counter. And Brian Bloom, made sure everybody got their paychecks and made sure that their tax filings were in compliance. And so for that reason, said that Brian Bloom alive when made, and of course, the Bloom Melvin injected about $200,000 into the company at some point, buying 200 shares. And he didn't really care about the company, except that it was his son's endeavor and he wanted his son to succeed. But that money right there, that, possibly saved TSR at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, Gary, the charisma and the vision and the, nobody could replicate personality and force of will. His larger than life personality. Whoops. I disappeared for a second. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're still here. You're just a little bit of lag.
Oh, sorry. Well, in any case, I asked Dave Sutherland. Now, Dave was at the company from 1975 through, 1997 or whenever it was.
Mhm.
He was there the whole time, right? Dave,
Right.
who do you think had the best interest of the company? He said Lorraine Williams. I was like, oh. I was gobsmacked. I said, why? She took the company from Gary, and that's a terrible person. She hated gamers. Dave said, because every day we were working and not getting paid. We had to work for this company and sacrifice, and we couldn't get paid. We had family, children, we had bills to pay. And when Lorraine came in, the company stabilized. And she stabilized it, and it was a smaller, more heavily worked crew, but they could rely that they weren't going to get fired the next day. They could rely that payroll wasn't going to be suspended for a year. But there you go. And, I don't know that anybody can say, well, Dave Sutherland has no idea. He was there from the very lean poverty days all the way through, living high and to the point where people every day have people in one day. And so that was his opinion. So now I think that Lorraine mismanaged the company. At one point, she let go of the person whose sole responsibility was to keep track of the Random House loan. That was her whole job, was to make sure that the Random House loan was managed properly. And that person was let go by Lorraine. And nobody picked up the slack. And so they lost sight of the Random House. Now, that's a simplification of how it went down, but that's the essential fatal flaw that caused the Random House thing to spin out of control and ultimately caused the demise of the company. And that was done by Lorraine. So.
Well,
So there's my non-answer.
It comes up in nerd circles a lot. The subject that you just mentioned, and for some reason, because I know you, Paul. People think that I know that, I have your depth of knowledge and your breadth of knowledge about these things, and I get asked this occasionally, what do I think? And I'm like, my response is simply, look, I wasn't there. I don't know. I mean, I was lucky enough to get to hang out with Gary for a few years. And I really like old D&D. Come hang out on the show the next time Paul's on, and we can ask him together. That's about the best answer I can give. But it does come back to that, and I think it is kind of funny in retrospect, even amongst people of a certain age group. You and I think we're not precisely spring chickens, but to pick sides and pick teams, it's like, arguing over, who had the right, the Assyrians or the Hittites, Paul. It's at this point, it's dusty bones lying in the desert. What's important is that we remember. We remember the glory of empire, not that we quibble over things like that. So that's just my view from the bleachers. But I do think it's still, and you've told me the bit about what Dave Sutherland said about Lorraine, and that's still, I mean, again, I wasn't there. But wow, I feel like you must have felt like when you first heard that.
I heard it at Culver's in Geneva. I was talking
Right up there
about
where...
something, and somebody from from the somebody from the TSR accounting department was sitting across the way from me eating lunch and said, "You know what really caused the demise of TSR?" Fascinating.
So Culver's in Lake Geneva. That would be where 50
you're
split
bound
from
since they employed 6% of the population.
Right. But Culver's is where 50 and Lakeshore kind of split. Like if you go like this, you're going on Lakeshore, and 50 just goes east out of town, right there.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's a heck of a lot of history, and I mean, how do you, as a historian of all this, I mean, you know, you've talked about legal entanglements before, and I know you and I have had a lot of off the record talks. How do you balance the negativity of trying to bring in this focus on an empire of imagination, if I may borrow a phrase, with surely a lot of hurt feelings that you must have encountered on the way?
I would say it was more a disappointment in the loss of Camelot. That the company was a very special place at certain points in its history. And something always came along to the round table. You know, something came along to disrupt the symmetry or the balance. There's a guy, Dave McGarry talk. He went out to dinner with Mary Jo and Gary one night in '76. And they had a little bit to drink, some dinner, and then they retired to the Gygax home on 330 Center Street and were having a little more drinks. And Dave McGarry is a very interesting. He looks at Monopoly as being part of our cultural fabric, right? And you know, before the last couple of years, nobody knows who created Monopoly, right? The guy's name isn't on it. The gal's name isn't on it. You want to tell the story. It's big company name, right? There's no Gary Gygax and Dave. There's just big company on there, right? And Dave thinks very interesting phenomena. And the fact that Dave created Dungeon, and one day he had hoped that his name created with it. It would just be part of the fabric of American culture, like Kleenex or Vaseline or whatever. There's no name associated with it. It's part of American culture. So Dave had a couple drinks. So wouldn't it be wonderful if one day nobody knew who created Dungeons and Dragons? And that because he was thinking of that, right? That it's such a part of our culture that nobody thinks about that anymore. Cut Gary to his core. Because Gary had an ego, right? And that was his baby. All right. D&D was the company's baby. That was his baby. And when Dave said that, I think it really shook Gary and Mary Jo too, because that was paying the bills. And it almost seemed, but to Dave, it was of the highest compliment. You've created something that's so ubiquitous in the fabric of culture that people don't even need to know who created it. It's just this thing that a person or a game, it's part of our cultural phenomenon, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of Dave having this sort of Camelot-like view of what this game could become, but Gary was holding on to it really tightly. And so that created a rift between them, and eventually Dave quit the company and left. So there's a lot of that. Dave sold everything, moved from Boston to live in little town of Lake Geneva, and joined this thing that had this huge potential, right? And then it just shattered for him, and then he had to leave. And this story happens over and over again. It happens with Gary. Gary has the worst story of all. When the Camelot is shattered, and then he's forever separated from the company he founded, the game he wrote, the game he sacrificed to publish, Gen Con, the game convention. He lost everything he had created in those years. And so that's the worst bitter pill, the worst disappointment of all of it. So I would say it's a sadness at the loss of Cam, as opposed to being bitter about any particular person or
Yeah, that it's interesting you bring that up. Of course, I've had Errol Otis, Dave LaForce on the show. I think of all of the TSR veterans that I've had on the show, only Tracy Lesh already lived there. But literally, of everybody I've had, everyone tells that story of, I dropped what I was doing and I went to Lake Geneva to work for TSR because I was into war games, or I was into Dungeons and Dragons, or I was into Dungeons and Dragons and war games. I mean, Alan Hammock, we've had him. He's semi-regular on the show. I think you and he are neck and neck in appearances on the show. But Alan, Central Alabama, he packed up and moved to Lake Geneva, and that's one of the reasons why we have the town of Suderham in A3. He was homesick. Suderham, South Home. And there's just this, it's almost a template story that you mentioned, and there's so many of these people that went, that they came there, and I think that kind of hooks back in to what you were saying about what TSR was doing, how it was big, it became this epicenter. I mean, I cannot fathom anything happening. There's a little town. The next time you're back in Florida, if you want to see just like a lovely, non-touristy, non-neon lights and LED screen part of Florida, I'll take you to the little town where Colleen and I got married. It's called Mount Dora. And the reason I bring this up, and I mentioned this before, if you closed your eyes and snapped your fingers and just were whisked out of the middle of Lake Geneva to the middle of Mount Dora, you wouldn't know you'd gone anywhere. The towns are damn near identical. But the reason I mention that is I can't fathom anything going on in Mount Dora that would make somebody in Southern California say, "Oh, I have to move there. There's something neat going on there." And yet, Errol Otis, out in California, skate punk Errol Otis, teenage 17-year-old Errol Otis with a world at his fingertips.
Errol Otis.
Dead Kennedy's Errol Otis just literally says, "Yeah, I'm going to go to a rural town in southern Wisconsin," and just
at 17.
At 17, exactly, at 17. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm picking up what you're putting down about people who went there because they had the heart, and they wanted to experience that. Let's see. We have kind of a tongue-in-cheek question here. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Probably drawn to that, attracted to that, wanting to be part of that special thing was Brian. He was like, Gary, I want to get in on this company. Let me get in on this company. Gary's like, no. Don Kay and I've got this, 10 years younger than us. No. They realized they needed the money to come on board the company. But Brian was a gamer. He wanted to be part of that company, not to be rich and famous. He wanted to be part of that company because he wanted to do something different than being a tool and die manufacturer or a business. He wanted to be part of something that had to do with gaming. And so he dropped a very lucrative career working in his dad's company to come work for pennies at TSR. So
you too can make tens of dollars in the exciting world of role-playing game publishing.
Yes.
So here's the tongue-in-cheek question. This is from Volcano God. I've had this one bookmarked now for like 15 minutes. Let's see. Paul, have you ever witnessed the combat computer functioning? Took a peek at the circuit board in 2018, and it looked like a mess to me. The big analog. What was it for?
It was created by Dave Wesley and Dan Nicholson, and it was to determine hit percentages or kill percentages in Napoleonics, and it accounted for, you'd flip one switch if they were using a certain type of musket. You would turn, depending on the wind speed for windage. There's all this other stuff that you would dials, and then you would flip a switch and it would come up on the meter at some range between 0% and 100%. And so it would, because of all those switches and the resistance and everything, it would come out percentage that to know what you needed to roll with dice, or it would just create percentage of kills. And so that's what they created it for. It was like a it wasn't necessarily for random generation, but it was for calculating all of the tables in the Napoleonics rules and flipping a switch and getting the result there. And they had a sort of John Henry moment in there too, where somebody said, well, I can calculate it faster than those machines. And so the machine went and they were setting it up, and this guy wrote it out with pencil and paper, and bam, and he actually tied the machine, according to Wesley.
That's great. That thing, I tell you what, it is a lovely piece of electronics. I would be willing to bet. I would be willing to bet that they're, retro is big. Retro sells. Retro is awesome. That if they actually, if they went to a company like PCBWay with a schematic that they could get like a single board version of it, and you could do it on your phone now. But I'm just saying that there would probably be somebody out there willing to put together like a Pico Raspberry Pi version of it or something like that. They're sitting on a gold mine. I'm telling you, Paul. I'm telling you. Volcano God got to play in an Arrow Lotus game. I have not. We had Arrow on the show back a few months ago, and I gotta. The next time I get to GaryCon, if he's there running, I will move heaven and earth to play in an Errol Otis run AD&D game. They look like a lot of fun. And see. Volcano said, I'm not sure that Paul ever answered the question of whether or not you've seen it function. Have you seen the combat calculator function, Paul?
No, it is not functioning at the time it was delivered. And Wesley said he was going to try to get Dan Nicholson to figure out why it was not operating at the time. I'm sure that there was one wire loose. It had been sitting in the garage for, I don't know, 50 years. It's been sitting in the garage for a long time.
I watch a lot of vintage computer restoration channels, and there's one called Usagi Electronics, and this guy, his current big project is a 1,500-pound Bendix. It's mostly digital, but still has several analog components in it, computer, and it's much the same way. It's like, okay, somewhere in here, there's a wire or wires that have come loose. And if I can get this thing working, I've got a piece of computer history going again. In fact, this would probably be right up his alley. He'd probably love to play it. Volcano God's calling you out. Look, you and Rusty might end up having to slap leather at high noon over this. He's saying, "I knew it. So, but I'm going to call you out now, Paul. All of this chat about the foundation D&D history is awesome, but you said something to me the other day in a private phone call, and I'm calling you on the carpet in front of the whole audience right now because of it. I personally think that the content warning that Wizards of the Coast has slapped on every classic TSR game on the digital archive is a slap in the face to people who enjoy those games. And I'm going to tell you why. The attention span of people these days is such that, all it takes is something like that. Well, okay, D&D is made by Wizards of the Coast, and they think old D&D made by TSR is bad. So I guess if you like old D&D, you're bad too. You're a sexist, racist, bigot, bad person, homophobe. And I'm sick of that. I am sick and tired of it. And you mentioned, we made it through the Satanic Panic. Exactly. We made it through that. That should be in the rearview mirror. It's over. It's done. I'm not flagellating myself anymore. I'm not putting on a hair shirt because I like the D&D that's got the Ifrit and the Wizard and the Knight on the cover anymore. Paul, I don't think it does bother me. It bothers me greatly that it's up there. I think it's offensive. I think it. I've said this, and I'll keep saying it. We were being attacked by blue-haired church ladies back in the 70s and 80s, and we're being attacked by people with blue hair all over again. The tune has changed, but the lyrics to the song haven't at all. It's still the same moral busybodies who are out there trying to tar and feather people who like advanced D&D and original D&D, because our D&D doesn't have it so that you can go play a fantasy barista. Your response, sir?
Nobody's ever bothered me about it.
What do you mean nobody's ever bothered you about it? Nobody's ever bothered you about the warning on the
No, nobody's ever
PDF files?
Nobody's ever said I'm playing an evil game or a bad game. I don't know. I've been running AD&D at conventions. I probably have the world's largest AD&D old school tournament running right now, and that's. I think we had 145 people play last year for the Legends of Role-Playing Tournament at Gary. Nobody said anything about it being a bad game or an evil game or a sexist game or that it had demons in it or anything like that. So I don't know. Maybe that makes me just think it's much ado about nothing. But I can understand where somebody doesn't like the fact that a judgment has been cast against something. that they like. But I don't know. We've been down this road before with the Satanic Panic, and you know, I think the Satanic Panic sort of purified our hobby for us.
Yeah, purged by fire because we all got burned at the stake. But no, I must say I'm disappointed. I was hoping for a little bit more Hellfire and Brimstone. You're too easygoing, Stormberg. I have said it before. You're the nicest guy in tabletop role playing, and damn it, you proved me right again. You're the nicest guy in classic. Yeah. How dare you sit there in your self-confidence and decency, sir? Have you no irritation? But no, I just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking at it from in the wrong end of the telescope. This is and this is something that you and I discussed. It's, you know, I heard from Gary, and you heard from Gary, and I'm sure other people have heard it, probably quotes or read it or something. D&D didn't sell nearly as well as until when the controversies started brewing up. That really boosted sales, which is nice for the bottom line, but it's, you know, not so nice for how one might feel in one's private moments. So maybe it is just much ado about nothing. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I need to find other stuff to get irritated at.
Here's what I think would be the worst thing. Is if they still make it available. You can still go buy it, just like you can go out and still buy a pack of cigarettes. But it's got the warning label on it. But you know what? I would guess that doesn't stop too many people. Like, it didn't stop us from buying the cassette tapes and the albums and the stuff that we wanted, the heavy metal, this, that, and the other. It didn't stop us from going to watch R-rated movies, even though we were underage. It didn't stop us from playing D&D, even though people said it was. It's something the corporation thinks they can do to control things or make their image look better. But I think ultimately in the end, it doesn't mean a damn thing.
Well, in that same vein, I mean, the 50th is coming up. I mean, it's like right over there, the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. And like, I was mentioning this on the show the other night. We had 2 years lead in for getting the AD&D reprints, the OD&D wooden set. For the 40th, they really seemed to celebrate. I haven't heard a peep out of Wizards of the Coast, and I mean, from a business standpoint, I mean, when you're a business as big as Hasbro, unless they have got some Skunkworks level SR-71 secrecy going on about anything they have planned, it doesn't look like they're really celebrating the 50th anniversary of D&D at all, other than to say, look at this great game we invented. Have you heard anything?
No, I haven't heard a darn thing. I have no idea. Other than Joe Manganiello and E1's documentary or D&D film that they were making. I don't know what's become of that, but they were pretty hot and heavy about making the D&D documentary.
Right. Him and how many other people? I mean,
well,
you know,
he did have Hasbro behind it.
you're saying that in past tense. Did have, was going to.
Well, I believe E1 was sold by Hasbro, and they were the ones who were making the film. Is that not true?
I honestly don't know. There's so much news about D&D falling out of Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. That it's hard to keep track of it all. So no, I mean, I hadn't heard anything about. I had heard he was doing a film, and then I'd heard he was doing a Dragonlance TV show, and then I haven't heard anything else about it. So I don't know. I'm asking you. I hadn't heard about a single thing that Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast were doing. Again, unless they've got it on such unbelievable lockdown. But again, I mean, I've heard they're supposed to release a new. I've heard they're supposed to release a new edition of D&D next year, but of course that interests me about as much as sitting and watching paint dry. But I do want to ask you something about that. Now, I know you're not. You run Legends of Wargaming, and you've got such. I mean, it's almost a convention inside of a convention. It is awesome. And let me tell you guys in the audience, if you make it to GaryCon, but you don't go up to the Legends of Wargaming area and you don't see some of those amazing dioramas, particularly those that Douglas puts together, gorgeous, beautiful pieces of art that Doug puts together. And everything, the exhibits that Paul puts up there, you're missing half of GaryCon, just in my opinion. But what is your feeling on the temperature of GaryCon? Do you think it's staying true to the ideals of a how should I say, historically acknowledging, historically embracing a convention? Because it's been a minute since GaryCon started. They're on what, GaryCon 15 this coming year, 16?
I would say that GaryCon has evolved with the times, but that there is still plenty of room to appreciate the war games that were around before D&D and ones that were being played while D&D was being created, and the ones that continue to exist after D&D was created. And then there's a very strong representation of original D&D, Holmes D&D, Mulvey D&D, Menser D&D, D&D. Obviously there's some really large organizations, but what's the largest single tournament at GaryCon? It's my Legends of Role Playing tournament, which had 145 people signed up for it. 145. And so that's a big chunk of the population of GaryCon, first edition AD&D, all at once.
Well, and that's fantastic, and that's why I say again to the audience, guys, you got to go. You definitely got to go check it out. Even if you can't get into Paul's tournament, there's so much other cool stuff. There was a chainmail game going on that was completely gonzo because it had like Star Wars and Boot Hill and Stargate and World War II and just some amazing, just ridiculous fun stuff. And is it is it Tim Kask that runs Circus Maximus?
Tim used to run it. It was run by another fellow named Joe Klein for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But there hasn't been anybody running it in the past couple years since COVID started. I think somebody just entered it last year to run it again. So,
right on. And of course, Fight in the Skies. There, I don't think there was a time when I was in the Legends of Wargaming rooms that I did not see Fitz games going on. Or was it Dawn Patrol?
Yeah, same thing. There's really no difference. Fight in the Skies is just the first name of the game. And then TSR decided they wanted to rename it Dawn Patrol in 1980, but it's the same game. So they call their society the Fitz Society, or the Fight in the Game Society. And it's been around since 1968. So it's been around a long time.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people overlook, is that, like, and as obviously not you, but I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that it wasn't like Chainmail came out and then a week later Dungeons and Dragons came out. Chainmail was 71, 72.
Chainmail was developed through 1970, was published early 1971, was revised in late 72, and was actually not a TS. It was published through a company called Guidon Games. And then 1975, in 1975, TSR had some cash from Dungeons and Dragons, and so then they bought the license for the Chainmail rules, bought the copyright, and started publishing them themselves that year.
Right on, and that's when they went to the comb bound. I just happen to have a comb bound chainmail there, but and that's when they switched over. This is actually new enough, as it were. That's got Grimorley down there on it in the corner. So, this is a question. This is kind of preyed on me for a long time, and I can't believe I've never asked you this. Outside of D&D, what's your favorite RPG?
I like Gamma World an awful lot because it has a little more of the OD&D style, which is you can really make up stuff, and the players just have no argument against it. It is whatever you decide, because there's a lot of unusual things that can happen, but it's really my favorite, because nothing makes me happier than getting a metagaming PC to believe that a parking meter is a plasma rifle, and they carry around about a year waiting to power up this plasma and blow away the next glowing mutant giant bunny rabbit they see. But instead, it's just been a parking meter they've been carrying over their shoulder for the last 12 months.
Yeah, we do a live stream of Gamma World on Friday nights here. It's been a lot of fun. I'm not going to give away too many secrets. I might have some of the players listening in, but they're in the ruins of Florida, and they have found Disney World, except Disney World is completely intact inside. Like, all the grass is trimmed, All the structures are intact. Everything's painted. Everything's functioning, just like Imagineers just built the thing and have been maintaining it for hundreds of years, except they'll go around and they'll look like, you've been to Disney World, there's little shady spots where you can sit. Well, that's heaped up with skeletons. Like, okay, what's going on there? So, or they have been attacked many times by security robots wearing full Mickey Mouse character costumes. So that's been a lot of fun. I'd have to agree with you that Gamma World can be a lot of fun to mess with people's expectations. Oh, this place is going to be ruined too, because I had it complete. Like, they tried to get a functional monorail to take them to the park, and it's like the monorail is completely overgrown, and the hotels outside the park are ruins. And then when they get in, it's like Disney from the 1990s. It's just perfectly preserved. So, and I'm not going to tell why, because again, they might be listening.
Well, but when I ran a Boot Hill game. I was taking my players on a tour of all of the D&D games, and we played, I think, Holmes Basic and using chips. And then one of the games we played Metamorphosis Alpha. We also played Boot Hill. And when we played Boot Hill, then after Boot Hill, we went into the farm and played Gamma World. And the players traveling through Albuquerque ran into traveling through New Mexico, ran into the town that their whole thing had taken place, the town of Dead Mule. But it had been turned into a sort of Westworld amusement park with animatronic robots that would pull pistols on you and shoot. So they ended up having to deal with their own annoying animatronic selves on a regular basis. But the best part of that whole thing is they finally came to this one room, and I described this. Square black box that had a rotating cylinder, and it started spinning at high speeds, and there were a number of slots that were going up and down, and it started generating a high rate of mechanical speed, and they were just about to open up with every black ray laser machine gun grenade that they had, and somebody went, "Oh, it's a player piano." They thought it was sort of horrible security robot that was about to evaporate their entire.
I was thinking slot machine, but that's awesome. Player piano. That's good. They're about to mag dump on a player piano. That's great. So that kind of pulls us down an interesting lane. You've told me so many stories about your DMing, and I'd love to play, even if just for a brief time in a D&D campaign you were running. But what? I guess to kind of keep with the conversation, what is your What is your feeling on screwing with player expectations? Like, let's take the Boot Hill example. Let's say you sit down and you say, okay, guys, we're going to play Boot Hill. You're in this farm town. It's nestled in a valley, and the green hills kind of extend up, and everything is pastoral, and it's wonderful. And there's Clem and his mule, and they work the fields. But anyway, you do a big reveal 5 or 6 sessions in. They're on a deck of the Warden. There's literally for generations, these people have believed they were, in Kansas in the 1870s or something like that. What's your take on that DMing style or that that sort of gambit, if you will?
Oh, I think players are delighted by it because it's really hard to capture the magic of that first role-playing game experience, that first Dungeons and Dragons experience. It's really hard to recapture that because you don't know anything about the world. So if taking a step this way will kill your character. You don't know any of that stuff. And so there's just a super high level of catharsis in that. And I think when you do those direction changes, or you got them affecting one thing and reveal another, I think that brings back that magic of immersion and catharsis in the game that, is harder to get when it's just, you knock down another door, there's some goblins. You knock down another door, there's more goblins. You knock down another door, and there's more goblins and a really big goblin.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for careful use of it, though. I mean, I think when you set a tone and players get in a groove, I think there's a degree of, look, we've bought into your world. Okay, we accept that this is Greyhawk. We accept that this is Toril. We accept that we're on the Starship Warden. And I think if you pull the rug out too often, people's minds tend to wander. They sort of get to this is going to change. I might as well not enjoy it. But I agree with you. I think good.
I pretty much ran a whole campaign like that, starting with OD&D and then going to Boot Hill and then going to Top Secret and then going to Gamma World and then going to Metamorphosis Alpha and then coming all the way back around to AD&D, our regular AD&D campaign, when the players discovered that the ship in the Barrier Peaks was actually the generation ship that they had been on, and that they had developed relationships and families and careers and lived and died and investigated planets on. And that dude sitting in that chair was actually, that skeleton sitting in that chair was actually their character in that campaign. And their D&D character just discovered it. It's mind-blowing.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is do you think there's a practical limit to the number of rug pulls? Let me phrase the question like that.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah. And, I've played with some game masters who don't want the players to have any source of reference whatsoever. You got to have archetypes. And if the world's all dark and there's no redeeming qualities to it to fight for, and there's certain things that you are the tenets of the campaign that have to be something that the players as human beings on planet Earth can recognize and associate with. And so if you pull out those tenets, you pull out those anchors too often, then it's just going to be a confusing welter of a bunch of cliches that you really can't put together in any sort of mental picture. So I think, yes, if you do it to destroy your character's engagement in the campaign, you can destroy your campaign world by just doing it too much. Of course, when I did it was outside of campaign, and then it came in and connected with their whole campaign. And so it kind of was an elaborate way of writing a back history of that one object that they just found. They found that skeleton, and there's no reason for them to know the whole 3,000-year history of how that guy got there. I don't know. It was entertaining for me.
Well, there you go. And I think things like that are more delightful Easter eggs than rug pulls. I mean, I guess if we define a rug pull as a, oh, you thought you were fighting goblins in Castle Greyhawk, but it turns out there was delusion gas on your level of your fallout shelter that you'd been living in Gamma World, and those were in fact other settlers just trying to get to food sources. I think there's a difference between, hey, the skeleton in the chair is a character from way back when that we played, and the other ridiculous scenario. But I mean, I'll go
to my dice. Good day.
So, look into the future for a minute. What is what's over the horizon once you get the big Gygax Memorial in Lake Geneva? What's like okay, you've climbed up K2, what's the next?
Well, the idea is that we have the Dragon Days Fantasy Crossroads of the World Festival. Mm-hmm. That continues. People continue to come to the museum. People continue to come. I mean, the memorial is my only real goal because that's going to be something that fans from the world, they're going to come there, they're going to sit at that table and connect to it for as long as anybody remembers what D&D is. And I think that's a pretty neat thing, because I'll be dead and gone and people will probably be sitting at that table playing D&D of some ilk. And given the way that everything is becoming virtual and digital and less in the mind's eye and more in the eye, I think that I will be happy to have a legacy of creating something that brings people together to sit around a table and look at each other eye to eye and physically interact with each other. Gary, the guy who gave us all this great gift, that's what I hope will be the legacy of all this.
Well, I absolutely, if anyone has got the ability to pull this off, Paul, it's you. And I sincerely hope that it happens. I mean, I'm rooting for you. I don't think there's anyone here in the audience who isn't. So that's pretty awesome, and I hope the good people of Lake Geneva will kind of come to and agree on this. But it sounds like you've got them. You've got the hook set. You've got the hook good and set, and you just need to pull that line in, and you'll have everything. You'll have everything together. But speaking of virtual, look. I'm going to throw a little something at this. You know how they have like bird watching cameras where you can click on something, traffic cams, like, oh, what's the traffic on this street at this intersection? A Gygax table cam. Just think about it. Just think about it. Run it off solar power, little Wi-Fi over.
One, Bill.
You're going to have one? That's awesome. See,
It's on the public restrooms about 25 yards away.
That's not what I want. That's not what anybody wants. No, looking at the table. Oh, that's horrible.
No, it's not looking at the bathroom. It's looking from the corner of the building where there's power towards the table. About 25 yards away, but you can see the table. But I see what you're saying.
You had me scared there.
Maybe we'll put a little spy camera in Gary's left eye. That just looks at
there,
all the players.
There you go. Oh, that'd be distressing. You're sitting there and somebody pays a nominal fee to be able to control his eye to look around. All right, so you're going. Oh, God. All right, everybody, let's just take a break for a few minutes. Just try to fall around. Oh, that's horrible of me. Oh my gosh. Wave of Mutilation says, I'd like to think in 1,000 years' time, Gary's considered a god. I'm okay with that.
I think that, Bill, I think I've told you this before, but I think that we're kind of here right now. You know, we can't tell the forest from the trees. We don't know what actual impact role-playing games have had on humanity. I mean, certainly it's created thousands of lovers of science fiction and fantasy and authors and writers and game designers and creative screenwriters and cartoonists and artists and just everything. You know, I mean, there was a creative explosion that in D&D was because wargaming was very focused on history. Go outwards. It was always this. It was always focusing down into the history, and you got to have your epaulets right. And you can't have this cannon because it's smoothbore. You need a rifled one. And this 12-pounder, they didn't have those. There's a lot of no. And then we get role playing, and it's whatever you want. Yes, it's magic. Of course. Sure. Yes. Cool. And so you get this huge explosion of creativity as a result. And really, Rob Kuntz and both Dave Arneson felt that things were being choked. That it was this amazing creative thing where you don't need rules. All you really need to play a role-playing game is a handful of dice, and maybe not even that, and a person running the game who has a vague idea of how to use the dice to simulate an environment, fantasy, reality, science fiction, whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the basic tools for a role-playing game. And you really don't need anything else. And so there was this moment in time where role-playing could have been anything. And it became a lot of things, but very specifically, it became sort of monetized because Gary wanted to sell. As a matter of fact, after they first played with Arneson, excuse me, after they first played with Arneson, Rob and Gary were kind of, what do we do with this? And they were thinking, well, we could run adventures and then we'll write stories about it and then we can sell the story. Like a fantasy fiction generator. But they didn't know how to sell it because in their mind, you didn't need anything. You didn't need rules. You didn't need any real rule book. It all took place in their imagination with pencil and paper that came out of their desk drawer, with dice that they had lying around. None of it was sellable. It's a non-monetized form of entertainment like children playing on the playground.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a hard time figuring how they were going to make money doing it. But eventually they figured out, well, we need to explain to people how to play a role-playing game. Ultimately, monetization of the concept, rather than just saying, well, you roll 3 dice and that creates a bell curve and gives you an average score. Do this when things fall within averages. But then when you want something unpredictable, use something linear. And if you want it really unpredictable, use a large. And so you teach those tools, and that's all you need to play the game, and storytelling. And some people say that's the magic of OD&D. That's the magic of AD&D. There's no skill system. There's not rules to do everything. The DM adjudicates what he thinks you need to do to jump over something, or to ride a horse, or whatever. And so slowly the freedom of that, or the beauty of that simple, these are your tools, storytelling and random probability, go to, you have to know all this stuff and everything has to work together or you're not doing it right. But that's how you monetize role-playing games, is you have to give people rules and splat books and supplements and character sheets and everything they need, or you tell them that they need to play a role-playing game. Just be, like I think when Gary first asked Dave, send me the rules. Dave literally thought, what rules? There are no, just making this up.
No, I agree with you. And
moment.
No. That's fine. I don't disagree with you. I mean, I've met people like our age, which means they're kind of 1.5 generation D&D players. I mean, first generation D&D players would have been Gary, Dave, Rob Kuntz, people who were there. And those of us who were getting our D&D out of Kmart and toy and chain toy stores and that sort of thing, we're that half generation, right? But no, I've met people our age who straight up said that OD&D is and should have been it. Everything else that came after original D&D, the 3 books of original D&D, was a mistake. I'm not making that up either. And I think you might even know who I'm talking about. But there are people who are straight up just tell you, no, OD&D was enough. I think that's a little bit reductivist, though, because how far back are we going to go? I can say, well, no, OD&D just is complete. It's a straitjacket. Just use chainmail and 2d6 and make the rest up. But I myself, I find the perfect balance to be first edition AD&D. And what do I mean by that? Well, everything before Unearthed Arcana. I think Unearthed Arcana forward was too much, but it's going to vary person to person. But what is your line in the sand on original D&D? Let me ask you that.
Well, I would say, I don't know. I've played D&D and Holmes Basic and AD. I like AD&D because there's so much in it that I find adventure in everything in it. There's just so much adventure in it. And I think OD&D didn't need as much of that detail because Arneson and Kuntz and all those guys were reading Lovecraft and Merritt and Vance and Howard and Leiber. They had all of that stuff. That was their rule book. that was creating their worlds and magic and all of that stuff. And I think that when somebody comes to it outside of that environment, they need a little help. They need the bits and the pieces and the milieu and the genre and they need to understand the form of it. But I just love AD&D because I'll look at a spell and then I'll think of a whole adventure based on that one spell. Where I don't know that to do that with OD&D because the spells are so simply written, maybe a sentence at most, maybe 2 sentences, right?
Right.
And and really, if you get into later OD&D, Bill, I mean, if you're looking at Eldritch Wizardry, you're starting to already get into the crunchy bits and the Mace of St. Cuthbert and those sorts of things. And I don't know, all that stuff just the Monster Manual. I mean, I whole adventures under the hobgoblins taking over human ruins to make as their encampment or whatever, and then I just go on it, and I'll roll up 400 hobgoblins, but then my mind will just go, what if they are inhabiting a human quarry, a quarry that was used to make a nearby castle, and they've taken over the castle, fell and ruined, but they have taken over this quarry nearby, and I just that sort of detail that's in AD&D, I can always find something to riff on, always find something to inspire me, always something that makes me think out of the box for creating adventures.
No, and you mentioned original D&D, and when you get into I would say even when you start with Greyhawk, and then when you drift into Blackmoor, Eldritch Wizardry, touch on gods, demigods, and heroes, and then your mind might naturally turn to tracking down PDFs of the Strategic Review, or if you have the pockets, physical copies of same. And the first year and change of the Dragon. At that point, if you're incorporating all of those items into your OD&D game, you effectively have got AD&D. You've got a 7 or 9 alignment system. You've got, I'd say, 80% of the spells. You've got the division between elf as adventuring class unto itself, and now elves can be all these things. You got psionics, devils, demons, different planar travel, and that sort of thing. And that's why I stick strictly to an AD&D game. It's not that I don't find OD&D fun. I do. The one game I ran at GaryCon was just a pickup game of OD&D because I have a Lulu print of all the books in a single booklet. So if I'd lost it or somebody had pinched it, it would have been like, darn. But when it comes to sitting down and running a long-term campaign, I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, I find the Dungeon Master's Guide to me is the tourist handbook to the city of Greyhawk, if you follow. Because there's God.
I'd say the single best reason to play AD&D Guide because it's the most fantastic book of this is how you make it interesting. It's not hold the player's hands and make sure that they don't die too many times. It's you're the blackjack dealer in Vegas. Give them your best game, and they'll want to keep, and they'll come back for more because it's a challenge. It's interesting. It's engaging. there's a thrill when they beat your scenario, whatever. And it's not an adversarial game master. It's, you're not trying to show that you're better than them. What you're trying to do is to show them that they're better than they think.
Exactly. And, I tell my players, I say this on the show, I tell various groups this, look, it's easy for me as a game master to kill your characters. It's shockingly easy. And do it by the rules. I don't even have to use fiat and say, well, rocks fall and everybody dies. No, I've got an entire arsenal of, these are the rules, your character's dead, things that I can do. The trick is not killing off player characters. The trick is keeping them alive long enough for them to enjoy it. Wave of Mutilations is great gaming philosophy, Mr. Stormberg. Although I would quibble with you slightly about adversarial. I don't think that's necessarily a bad term, but the way I use it in and the style of DMing you're describing are the same thing. So if you ever hear me say I enjoy being an adversarial DM, I just mean the same thing that you mean. I'm perhaps not using the best term in the world for it, but I do... to paraphrase,
I think my players once described it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to paraphrase Robert Heinlein in Starship Troopers when talking about being a drill instructor, it's not about making it too hard. It's about making it just hard enough. But go ahead. No, you were going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, I think when my players hate a villain so badly in my campaign, they were talking about it at the table the other night, and they're like, dude, and this is talking about a Clavdra. Dude,
Clavdra,
she's never
yes.
going to let us walk out of here alive. She's never going to do this, or oh my God, we're never going to make it out. And talking about this NPC and the third party, and then one of my friends who's a very pragmatic fellow will say, it's Paul, right?
Well, that's just a hallmark of your game mastering genius. So when are we, the Dungeon Masters, going to be able to unleash some Paul Stormberg on our own campaigns? That, I guess, would be the ultimate question that I have for you tonight.
I don't know what that means, Bill.
When are you going to publish?
I'm working on it. No, last year was a bad year for Paul Stormberg. It was a year. I lost, I buried my father. I buried my mother-in-law. I had a nephew commit suicide. My daughter had open heart surgery. And I kind of had this sort of come to Jesus moment where I wasn't really quite as gung-ho to be involved in my hobby. And at least professionally, I still love to play the game and play, but I had really been kind of on all sorts of fronts to accomplish various things with the Gygax Memorial Fund, publishing, Gary Con, Legends of Wargaming, Legends of Role Playing, all that stuff. And, that year just kind of sobered me up to the fact that there are other things in life than just gaming. And so I took a step back and I took care of some things with my family life Nothing wrong, but just focusing on the things that were important in life other than just gaming. And I think I've got myself mentally back into the place where I'm ready to come back in, start pushing those pursuits again. But it was, it was a rough year, and we had COVID going on too, which of course everybody experienced. I think I've had COVID like 3 or 4 times now, and so it really kind of, I would say, it knocked me off my game. I wasn't operating on the high I had been operating on, and I cooled my engines a little bit, and I just sat around on Friday nights and watched movies with my, and I really didn't care that I was supposed to get something published or get it done. But, I think I've had enough time to reflect on family and get my youngest through her heart surgery and on to college, and get my boy into high school, and get my house fixed up a little bit, all the little things here and there that never got taken care of because I was on such a hard track to get stuff done. So, but, I'm coming back to it, and I am seeking life work, hobby balance.
Right on, man. Right on. It's the triangle, right? Keeping those 3 things in balance. And what can I say? It's cliche, but from the bottom of my heart, speaking for myself, I really understand, dude. I feel you completely. I know a lot of those shocks can just kind of put you off of things like that, and you do have to step back, and you do have to reevaluate. And the fact that you've been able to drive forward with Legends of Wargaming, with the Gygax Memorial, with the wonderful things you're telling me that you're doing to your players to drive them absolutely bonkers. I'm glad that you're able to kind of move on towards the sunlight a little bit, and I hope things continue to stabilize for you, my friend. I genuinely do. So any parting stuff I've irritated you with, anything I've driven you up the wall about that you'd like to throw back at me here? Because I've, God knows, I've kept you sitting there for 2 hours listening to me babble. So anything at all that you'd like to say to the fans?
Well, I think that this memorial is going to happen, and we're going to need help to make it come out the way that we want it to come out. It's going to be about a $500,000 project when it's all said and done. Maybe $600,000 for all parts. The Gygax Memorial Fund has had a lot of aspersions cast on it, but I have seen all the books and the records, and I've gone over the numbers, and I know that every about this organization is fiscally sound, and we are going to go forward with a Kickstarter. We're going to give fans the opportunity to purchase pavers, which will go around the memorial. You can have your D&D group name on there, whatever, or your favorite character, and you can in the memorial as part of your donation. But we're going to have a Kickstarter, which will happen in September, will end in October, and we need that to raise the remainder of the funds to get this thing built. And if the fans truly come out at this time and truly fight for Gary's legacy and memorialization, We are going to have an amazing memorial that will keep giving to generation after generation of D&D fan long after we're all gone. But I need the fans to really think that this is what we need to do for Gary. He gave us an amazing gift, and now we need to give that gift and appreciate him and the fantastic legacy of creativity and imagination he's given us.
Well, there you heard it, folks, from the man himself. And I just put the link to the Gygax Memorial Fund. That's going to stay up on the screen for the rest here. You guys can check that out and see all the cool stuff that they have going. And if you're coming in late, watch the whole thing again. Watch the whole stream again and listen to the words of wisdom from Paul. But Paul, there is one thing that we need to do, though, before we wrap up this evening. I was really looking forward to a good spat with you about the warning labels thing, and you kind of disappointed me. But don't think that I'm letting you out of here without a joust.
Outstanding. I'm ready.
At thee. Have at thee. Okay. So let's see how we do this here. Have you got your aiming point, sir?
Yes.
Have you got your lance position, sir?
Yes.
Then, sir, let's joust!
Joust!
Joust! Okay, what was your aiming point?
Center pale.
Center pale. All right. And let's see. My defensive position was I was steady seat. So center pale versus steady seat. That is a B. Your lance is broken, sir. My aim point was also center pale. I'm sorry?
Yes. Lean left.
Okay. Okay, center pale, lean left. Glances off. Well, folks, what do you think? Shall we have one more tilt for the audience? I will lend you a lance if you need it.
It's 1-2.
1-2. All right. One final. Do you have your aiming point, sir?
Yes.
Do you have your defensive position, sir?
Yes.
Joust! What is your aiming? What is your aiming point, sir? I like it.
Do you want me to tell you aim point?
Yes. What is your aim point? Ready.
Base.
I'm sorry. That was you say that was fess or base? I'm sorry, base. All right, base, and my defensive position was lean right, so that glances off. I had Dexter Fess.
3 points for me.
3 points for you. I had Dexter Fest, sir, as my aim point.
I said lean right.
Lean right. And a miss. You have carried the day, sir.
Oh!
I doff my helmet to you.
2 points. 3-2. A fine joust.
A fine joust. Paul, thank you very much for coming on the show again. You'll come back, I hope, right?
Absolutely.
All right. I'd like to thank our audience very much for being here tonight. Thank you all. Please do check out the Gygax Memorial Fund. Awesome stuff is happening out there. And if you haven't seen, you can go, you can find on all kinds of social media. You can see the bench dedication that Paul did. It's wonderful. The same for the Gygax Reading Corner dedication, the Appendix N Reading Corner dedication. That's super awesome too. And again, I want to thank you. Tomorrow night we'll be back. We have another guest tomorrow night. Bill T from Paint Minis Live will be here. Paul has a sword. Gotta love it.
That's our dedication sword.
And that is almost, but not quite, the same shield that's on the front of the Dungeon Master's Guide that the Knight Finding the Ifrit has.
It is the same.
It is exactly the same. Okay.
So that's a Gygax family crest.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool. So again, Paul, I thank you for being here. You can hang out if you want to chat afterwards, but I understand equally if you do have to split. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to warn the characters because, of course, somewhere loose in the studio is a dreaded owl bear.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around. Some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? Naked as a toad all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow. From action flicks to dancing dicks, just take me to the show.